And I said, what do you mean? He said, it's snowing. And I was so disappointed. I want you to imagine for a moment that you have relocated to a new location, perhaps to an apartment complex where the neighborhood is a little bit more littered with dirt. It seems like there's kind of like this layer of grime that rests along sidewalks and walkways, places where street sweeping just never seems to happen. The noises that emerge from within the place and from behind it are not ones that welcome you, but rather ones that kind of conjure fear and isolation. How will you respond? Imagine you enter a new community where the languages around you vary, the smells are unfamiliar, and the decorations on yards and through windows look nothing like your own, nothing like what you're familiar with or what you grew up with. Their dress is different, their gardening styles are different, their food is different. How will you respond? Imagine you move into a new neighborhood. Front yards are impeccable. Backyards hold garages that allow people to exit and enter without being seen. Alleyways offer brief encounters. Meeting spaces are created for headphones, computers, and eyes averted. Barbecues are in the backyard. Friends are close circles only with no openings. A perfect neighborhood at a glance, but a lonely neighborhood just as much. How will you respond? How will you respond wherever it is that you call home? How will we respond right here where we call home? I live in a townhouse. For those who've been to my place, you know, so we're all attached together. There's a big cluster of them. And we don't have garages, so we have to walk from our parking lot, all the way to our house. And which means that on a daily basis, I am forced to acknowledge the presence of other people in the world. There's this neighbor, she always gives my kids snacks. She hugs them. And I'm like, I cringe, and we're always like, don't eat snacks from people. They've become very good. They bring them inside now. If you sit in the backyard, it surely means you're going to have a conversation with someone, and suddenly me listening to my ebook is 10 minutes of talking about whatever's happening in the neighborhood. It's a place where you just cannot hide. You can't hide from one another, and that also means you can't hide from the conflict that loves to live in condos, where you live in close quarters. There's cars parked too closely. We've had that one, and it was us. They said park too close to them. We've had garbage bins treated as dumping sites. There's every time they put out a newsletter. You can't put your couch in the garbage. And but alas, people do it. There's dogs causing dog problems, neighbors causing neighbor problems, and these faint strings of community, they rise and fall. And so I'd much rather never see my neighbors. I'm sorry to say it. I don't want to have small talk. I want to walk from my house to the car, get the kids in as quickly as possible. I don't want to talk a lot about the weather, the flowers, or the rise in condo fees. But there is something about a space like that that pushes me towards part of what it looks like to be human, which is to be relational, concerned for and about the other, to think about how my actions affect the whole, to take notice of the people around me, even though they're not part of my close circle. And I'm left with a question that my faith refuses to let go of, which is, how will I respond? In today's passage, we meet Israel in exile. Their land has been taken, their communities have been ravaged, their rituals placed into tight boxes where they might be able to celebrate, or it might be a place of fear, depending on which neighbor sees them, asks them, or feels threatened by them. Disconnection from the land is equivalent to being disconnected from God, and the people rightfully wonder, what are they to do in a place like this? Surrounded by the songs of their enemies, the victory of those who have conquered them, and their burning question, has God left us behind? They find themselves displaced, grieving, angry, uncertain, and they want to hear what we all long to hear when it seems our surroundings are not as they should be, when the people around us are not who we imagined would be present, when our situation is not what we thought was promised. What we long to hear is that God is going to just pull us out. He's not going to force us to face the differences around us or to be immersed in those spaces that are unfamiliar. We simply want God to lead us to personal liberation. But instead, God does not invite the Israelites to be made free. He doesn't tell them how to take cover or how to take down their neighbors. He doesn't whisper a message of hope that is just for them or a path to freedom that will disentangle them from their neighbors. Instead, God says, your liberation, your community, your future, and your present is tied to their own. I don't want you to simply be made free. I want you to participate in your freedom as a way to participate in the freedom of those around you. Seek the peace of the city. Seek the shalom of the city. God invites the people to move away from a picture of the freedom of self, from the pursuit of freedom of themselves, into something that is so much bigger, so much more holistic and all-encompassing. God says, I want you to move from thinking about that which is private to that which is communal. Do not simply seek the peace for friends, for those who also are in exile. Do not simply seek the peace for those who find themselves in the same situation as you by creating close huddles and hideaways. Instead, consider this an invitation, an opportunity, a moment to breathe peace, to build wholeness, flourishing, harmony, justice, completeness, and restoration for all those who make up the neighborhood. For all those who call this their community, and within all of the spaces that are now your home. In other words, when you find yourself in exile, when you find yourself in neighborhoods and spaces that are unfamiliar, when you find yourself among those who are not like you, when you find yourself in spaces that seem broken and different, uncomfortable, you are certain, and places where you're certain you do not belong, seek the shalom of the city. Participate in their liberation as if it is your own. Participate in their wholeness, for it will help you to also be whole. Participate in their flourishing, for it will allow you to flourish. Participate in their restoration, for it will be a part of your own restoration. The prophet announces to the people, build houses, plant gardens, marry, raise families, bless the city. And the prophet speaks to us with our own situations, our own circumstances, moments, and places, and says, when you find yourself in the unexpected places, in and among unfamiliar faces, neighborhoods, communities, and neighbors that you feel you have no time or desire to know or be known by, how will you respond? The word shalom is one that I like to casually toss around because it's a word that I want to become so familiar to us that it in some ways defines us. Imagine what it would look like for you as an individual and for us as a church community to operate in the neighborhood where we have built and established our homes, and the neighborhood where our church is established, as spaces where we believed God's vision for the world could come to life. Imagine if shalom was not just a word we spoke of, but that which we would practice and see made manifest because of our faithful presence and our faithful practice. Shalom. This ancient greeting speaks to a peace that is best described as the pursuit of wholeness, right relationship, flourishing, justice, belonging, and restoration with God, others, self, and creation. These words are not simply that which we wait to see brought to life or mourn for their lack of presence, but they are our call to action and that which we are invited to embody, wherever it is that we find ourselves and whomever we find ourselves among. From a single person, an entire household, a group of friends, a congregation, a community, a neighborhood, all have the capacity to reflect shalom, all have the capacity to embody shalom. Jesus gives us a picture of this in the book of Mark as he encounters a woman that we often title as a woman with the issue of blood. I want you to consider the scene. Jesus gets off the boat. And as he gets off the boat, already there is a crowd of people. And he can already feel their prayers and their presence pushing against him. They have all kinds of expectations. And then there's this person who's quite well known, one of the leaders in the synagogue, who comes to Jesus, bends down before him and says, "My daughter is dying." To the crowds, he is well known, but in this moment, he is broken and small and helpless, and his daughter is dying. And everything he has tried hasn't worked, and so Jesus follows the man to his home. Now, all the while this is happening, there is another woman who's on the edges of the crowd. This is a woman who has been ill for 12 years. 12 years of doctors, 12 years of pain, 12 years of being isolated, unable to worship, unable to maintain relationships, unable to simply operate in ways that all those around her did. And she had spent everything to be made whole. But rather than finding her way to healing, she instead found herself enrobed in pain, her situation increasing, her isolation expanding, her hope dissipating until she heard about Jesus. When people spoke about Jesus, they talked about this miracle worker, a spiritual teacher, someone who could heal and free her from bondage, and she is willing to take the risk. She's willing to risk getting close to Jesus, even though it's almost impossible. And so she has this idea. She says, if I can just grab a hold of his robe, then maybe I can be made well. Maybe I can find shalom. And so she takes the risk. She reaches out her hand, she extends her faith, and then Jesus calls out, "Who touched me?" She's terrified. Would this be another moment where she would be remanded back to isolation? Or would this be a moment where she is invited into liberation? When she comes to Jesus, she's afraid that he's going to reprimand her, but instead she encounters this divine love and the words that she's always waited to hear. "Daughter, your faith has made you well." In a single moment, Jesus takes a woman who is physically suffering, socially isolated, spiritually excluded, and economically depleted, and offers her physical healing, belonging in the community, and the restoration of her dignity. Her encounter with Jesus leaves her made whole. Stories like that are repeated time and time again throughout the Gospels. As Jesus encounters people and communities who imagine that wholeness is an impossibility for them, they are surprised that simply being in his presence evokes the opportunity for liberation, the opportunity for wholeness, the opportunity for shalom. And I wonder if somewhere along the way that we lost sight of this as a part of our mission, as a part of our reason for existing. That as people encounter us, both as individuals and as a congregation, do they encounter shalom? Do they bear witness to the opportunity for wholeness? Do they see the possibility that they too can both embody and put into practice a way of being that is about their flourishing and the flourishing of others, their wholeness and the wholeness of others, their future and the future of those around them? Or do they simply see another person, another family, another building, another church? There's a pastor that sometimes I listen to his sermons, and he was telling the story about how he was driving. And he saw this electric car. And he said, "That's my next car." And because he's one of those pastors that people know all over the world, he can just go and say, "I want to buy this car." So he went into the dealership and he said, "I want that car." And they said, "Oh, it's not available. It actually hasn't even been manufactured." And he said, "No, but I just saw it, so I want to come and buy it today." He said, "I'm ready to pay for it, to take it home." And the salesman said, "But it's not ready yet." He said, "They're not yet available." And then as he kept persisting, the salesman said, "Oh, did you see a car with dealer plates on it?" And the pastor wasn't sure, and the salesman said, "Well, I'm pretty sure that that's what you saw." He said, "Once in a while, the car companies, they will make a few of a vehicle that they want to start selling in a specific market, and they let the dealership drive it around because they want people to start getting interested and looking it up." And he said, "It worked." He said, "Look at you. You came in asking about it." And he said, "We want people to get excited about this purchase in the coming months." Now, I want you to take that picture and I want you to imagine a church where bystanders who simply observe it, who see it in action, are compelled enough to want the same thing, are compelled enough to want to participate in the same thing, and are made at a minimum curious about who you are and what you have to offer. Now, that is a challenge for churches because we tend to be inside and we tend to operate a lot on a single day in a space. And so it's really challenging if a church is solely and mostly concerned about the church. Because it doesn't take much for the message to be passed on to your neighbors that what happens there in that building is for us and is not for them. Now, growing up, I was taught that the church was to be like a city on the hill. But there was always a caveat. This city on a hill was supposed to have bright lights, but we wanted to keep the curtains closed because we just didn't want too many people coming unless they were kind of ready and vetted enough and perfected enough to be made ready to belong. And sometimes even when they came in, we just made sure they stayed on the edges because until they could kind of find their way to the center. But what Jesus demonstrates and what Jeremiah speaks to the exiles is something far more dynamic and transformational. It's a people, a community, a congregation, a church whose presence is noticed, whose impact is revealed, whose dire desire to belong and to create belonging is not counted against it, but is what defines it. And Jeremiah the prophet insists that those in exile do not pull away from the community or from the people, from the very places where they are rooted, and instead insists that they get comfortable out and in and among the community. That they demonstrate that they're going to be there for the long haul. He insists that they multiply rather than get small and insignificant. And so my word to all of us is this. Part of the work of Shalom is getting comfortable right where we are. Build houses, plant gardens, raise families, multiply right where we are. And not just for the sake of getting comfortable, but because you wish to be a part of those who work for Shalom, and for Shalom to be what defines the place where our church is, where our homes are, where our families are, where we live and reside. And that work begins with prayer. Pray for the place where you are. Pray for the place where you are invited to plan and to garden and to grow. Pray for the streets and the stores and the people who make up the very places where we live. Timothy Keller tells the story of the work he did when his church was planting churches in New York City. And they were doing ministry in quite diverse and complex urban centers. So New York is this hub of wealth, but it's also a place of great poverty. Cultures were diverse, and people from around the world grew up side by side. Religious plurality was evident, and while the city was loud and moving, it was also a place that was isolating, lonely, and hidden away. Ambition drove the city, and ambition exhausted the city. And Keller noted that if the church was going to be faithful in a city like that, it could not simply be in the city, it had to learn how to love the city. And so one of the things they started to do was they would pray through the neighborhoods. As they walked through the neighborhoods, they would walk and pray deliberately for the businesses on the street, the schools, the families who lived in the apartment buildings, those struggling to find community, those who drove in and worked among them, the seen and unseen spiritual and emotional burdens. And their prayers went something like this. May our city seek out its good. May our neighbors flourish. May your shalom, your peace, be present here. Keller noted that so often when churches thought about that term shalom, they went to one extreme or the other. They went to withdraw or they went to dominate. But instead, he asked this of his church community. Perhaps we are simply called to invest in its common good, even while living as spiritual exiles within it. And what changed was how people viewed their neighborhood, not as an obstacle, not as a means to an end, not as something to use, but rather as a place that God already loved, where there were people God already knew. And their prayers became not just about those who they knew or the ministries they created, but rather about the life of the city, the neighborhoods, and the communities they were a part of. Jeremiah 29:11 holds those famous words, I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. In the context of shalom as a way of being, I think we have to kind of rethink those words. And the first thing to recognize is that that is not a promise to a person, but rather was a promise to a people. God knew the plans that he had for those in exile, but God also knew the plans he had for those who were in the neighborhoods they never imagined they might be in. God knew the plans he had for those who found themselves among neighbors they never thought they could ever find belonging with or among. And he said, I know the plans that I have for you in this space, among these people, and this neighbor, and it is for your prosperity and theirs. It is for your future and their future. It is for your good and for their good. It is for your shalom and the shalom of your neighbors. Imagine a church relocated to West District, a part of the West Springs Cougar Ridge neighborhood, surrounded by beautiful architecture, a walkable park, restaurants, my new favorite coffee shop right across the street, and neighbors, so many neighbors. The question that Shalom asks of us is, how will we respond? The invitation is this. Build houses, plant gardens, pray for your city, bless your neighbors, seek its shalom. God is forming us to be a church who will not withdraw from the world, but rather be a blessing right where we are. A church who will not shrink back from the neighborhood, but a church that enters the neighborhood to seek its shalom. A church who will not only ask God, what do you have for us, but also ask God, what do you want to have happen through me for all of us, right where I am? Right here in West District, right here among condos and coffee shops and pathways and playgrounds, right here among young families and seniors, newcomers and strangers, and people who are searching for belonging. Right here among people carrying hidden griefs and private loneliness, quiet fears and exhausted marriages, anxious children, spiritual hunger, and deep questions about whether anyone truly sees them. What if God has placed us here not merely to attend church, but to embody good news in the neighborhood? What if every conversation and every act of hospitality, every prayer, every shared meal, every welcome, every moment of compassion becomes this glimpse of the kingdom of God breaking into the neighborhood? May we be a people who build houses and plant gardens. May we be a people who bless our city. May we be a people who seek the flourishing of others as deeply as we seek our own. And may we be those, and may those who encounter us encounter something more than a church building. May they encounter shalom. Amen. Let's stand together.